The popular imagination defaults to the missile, the hypersonic glide vehicle, the ICBM arching across the Arctic. This is a comforting, obsolete fiction. The strategic risk is no longer a launch sequence, it is silence. The 21st century casus belli will not be announced by sirens, but by the dead air of a severed connection. Rival actors, unconstrained by legacy force structures, understand the new center of gravity. It is not the carrier strike group, it is the data packet. Your portfolio, your GPS, your access to liquidity, they do not run on policy. They run on 750,000 miles of submarine fiber optic cable. According to our USI analysis, these cables, often no thicker than a garden hose, carry over 95% of all global data and $10 trillion in daily financial transactions. The kinetic cost to sever these nodes is trivial. The systemic cost is total. The primary vector is not invasion. It is targeted, asymmetric paralysis. The objective is not to defeat the Leviathan in a kinetic exchange. It is to blind it. To sever the optic nerve connecting the state to its financial system, its military, and its population. Simultaneously, CSIS wargaming demonstrates a parallel vulnerability in orbit, high-altitude satellite blinding, a non-kinetic attack that renders GPS and communication constellations inert. This creates the blind Leviathan, a state of maximum kinetic capability and zero situational awareness. A superpower with full spectrum dominance, but no targeting data becomes a liability, forced to rely on launch-on-warning protocols designed for a bygone era. The motive for asymmetric escalation is not conquest, it is solvency. A conventional kinetic war is the most expensive venture a state can undertake, draining its treasury and its political capital. For a rival power, a protracted conflict becomes a domestic liability, a fast track to internal collapse. This is not a military problem, it is a solvency crisis. Analysts at RUSI frame Russia's campaign not merely as a war, but as an accelerant for its own domestic solvency crisis. An unpopular war, burning through reserves and public support, forces a pivot. The regime's survival depends on finding a more efficient vector of attack. When you can no longer afford to trade tank for tank, you are forced to seek leverage. The pivot is a mathematical certainty. The objective shifts from defeating an army to collapsing a system. This strategy is incentivized by the target's own visible liabilities. Identified economic fragility, confirmed by reports from both the U.S. Gold Bureau and The Guardian, source number 1/4, presents a financial target. Simultaneously, documented internal political fractures, which Al Jazeera analysis calls a U.S. inflection point, source number 2, present a social target. The motive is to apply a low-cost economic or cybernetic pressure point that triggers a disproportionate, cascading failure within the U.S. system. It solves the rival's solvency crisis by forcing the superpower to bankrupt itself, not on a battlefield, but in its own banks and on its own streets. The calculus of modern warfare is an exercise in economic absurdity. According to analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the kinetic cost has inverted. A state invests $5 million in a main battle tank, a complex asset requiring a trained crew, logistical support, and a vast industrial base. A rival actor counters with a $500 first-person view drone carrying a repurposed munition. This is not a balanced equation. It is catastrophic asymmetric leverage. The result is what analysts term the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for inflicting strategic damage has collapsed. Any non-state group or second-tier power can now achieve a level of lethality previously reserved for superpowers. This isn't about symmetrical fleet-on-fleet engagement. It is about targeting a system's solvency. The loss of 1,000 drones is a negligible manufacturing cost. The loss of one tank is a multi-million-dollar asset liquidation, a blow to industrial capacity, and a crisis of military doctrine. A kinetic strike will not occur on U.S. soil. The vector of attack is not a carrier group, it is a signal. The theater of operations is not the homeland, it is the gray zone, a global network of proxy laboratories used for live-fire testing of systemic exploits. CSIS documents detail this doctrine. Regional instability, such as warnings out of Canada or socio-economic stress in South Africa, is not a distraction. It is a staging ground. Here, rival actors can probe U.S. systemic response with near-zero kinetic cost. They test social fracture points, amplifying internal political divisions cited by outlets like Al Jazeera. They model economic shocks against the fragile dollar system, a liability confirmed by both the U.S. Gold Bureau and critiques of IMF policy. The naval expansion of a mid-tier power like Pakistan is not about challenging the U.S. Navy directly. It is about securing regional dominance to ensure their own gray zone remains a viable launchpad for asymmetric financial and cyber operations. The goal is not to sink a destroyer. It is to trigger a U.S. solvency crisis from a safe distance. Every probe in these proxy laboratories refines the attack algorithm. The final payload is not a missile. It is a single, perfectly calibrated economic or digital event designed to trigger a non-linear, cascading collapse. This is not war. It is a mathematical liquidation. The nuclear command protocol, known as launch on warning, is a liability from a prior age. Analysts at CSIS confirm the doctrine dictates that once satellite and radar systems detect an incoming missile launch, a retaliatory strike must be initiated before the incoming warheads arrive. Waiting for impact is not an option. It guarantees the destruction of your own kinetic assets, ensuring a zero-sum defeat. This protocol is now the primary vector for asymmetric attack. A rival actor does not need to launch a physical missile. They need only blind the system that looks for one. A targeted cyber attack on early warning radar and satellite data streams creates informational insolvency, the inability to trust what your own sensors are telling you. This triggers the fog of digital war. The commander sees black screens. The protocol presents a binary choice. Is this a system error, or is this the silent precursor to a decapitation strike? According to the doctrine, the absence of a signal is itself a potential warning signal. The fear of paralysis forces a choice based not on data, but on the programmed fear of inaction. In that moment, the kinetic cost of waiting is perceived as infinite. The decision to launch becomes a mathematical certainty, driven by a systemic protocol that cannot distinguish between a glitch and annihilation. The path to escalation is not a choice. It is the execution of a preloaded command in a system that has been rendered blind. Rival actors do not initiate a systemic shock with a kinetic strike. They begin with a calibration shot. The objective is not asset destruction. It is to collect data on systemic brittleness and political response time. Given the documented liabilities in U.S. economic architecture, source number 1, number 4, and the internal fractures that inhibit unified response, source number 2, the optimal vector is not military, it is logistical. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, anticipate an unexplained and attribution impossible outage at a critical U.S. port, Los Angeles or Houston. A multi-hour shutdown of the digital logistics and crane operations network, timed for peak throughput. The event will be officially memory holed as a cascading software failure. It is, however, a mathematical probe, a test of the system's solvency before a full-spectrum liquidity crisis is engineered. It is the launch sequence beginning.